It's not 5 o'clock, and they don't care. Welcome to Wine to 5. Entertainment, education, and everyday drinking for everyday people. Your hosts are Valerie Caruso and Stephanie Davis, two wine educators who don't need a clock to know when to pour that next glass.
This episode is about the wines of Israel. Of course, we'll begin by thanking Gregory Vine for sending us these wines from the Golan Heights Winery.
And that is exactly what's in our glasses today. We're going to talk about these wines, where they came from, and along the way, we're going to talk about the major grapes in Israel, Israeli winemaking, the regions, and give out some little cultural information as well. But we're going to get right into it because we got 4 wines to get through today. So, Steph, you want to kick things off with the white?
Yes. So, in our glasses, we have 1 white and 3 reds to go over. This one is the 2016 Mount Herman, and it is a blend, Muscat, Canelli, Sauvignon Blanc, and Viognier. Loving this wine. This is one of my favorite out of all 4. Mount Herman is one of Golan Heights Winery's brands, just to make that clear. Yeah, I love how last night Justin and I opened this up and he said, of course, he says, I like it a lot. And then he said, it's not super crazy pucker you up.
Right.
I said, yeah, I think it's very expressive, which you would expect from Muscat, so super expressive nose, and the aromatics are coming out of the glass with flowers, citrus. I think it's a cheerful wine, really.
It's one of those aromatic wines, and of course, you've got all of those volatile grape esters coming out of here, because Sauvignon Blanc jumps out of the glass. Viognier is an aromatic grape that jumps out of the glass, as is Muscat. So first thing you get, your nose doesn't even hit the glass.
Yeah.
And you get some beautiful, pretty floral aromas. But in the mouth, you get that rich, that oiliness of the Viognier, which I like. And then you get a little bit of the green from the Sauvignon Blanc, but it's not like cat pea green. It's just a nice little
and it's
herbal.
Not too bracing either of the acidity.
No.
I described it last night as the acid holds the juicy fruit flavors together like a properly fitting belt.
Well done, madam. I think that we just leave that there. I have nothing to add to that. But should we talk a little bit more about the winery that this comes from?
Yeah. Golan Heights Winery was founded in 1983 and helped put modern-day Israeli wines on the world wine map. It is a leader in quality, technological innovation, and new variety development. That is something they're really doing all over Israel, but this place is such a cool winery, and the winemaker, the head winemaker, Victor Schoenfeld, is really a pioneer and very talented, so we're going to continue to see a lot of great things coming out of this winery, and they're different brands. But, we're drinking this white, but red grapes make up a large percentage of Israel's harvest, and international varieties are leading the charge, as you will find from our tasting today. How about wine number 2, Val?
So have you tasted the 2016 Mount Herman Red yet?
Yes. I liked it.
This is a blend of Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, Merlot, and Petit Verdot. This is about a $13 bottle.
Right.
I love this wine. This is the one that's open right now. The other ones I Coravand. So this and the white are the only ones I've left open.
I don't think we said at the wine before is also around the $13 price point. So it's about the same.
Right. And this is one of the bigger wineries in Israel, too. So they do have a bit of a higher production. Of the 5 major wine regions in Israel, we're going to talk about this one first, because this does come from the Galilee region, or Galil in Hebrew, and it is the furthest north in latitude with higher elevations, and it's generally regarded as one of the better appellations because of that diurnal shift you get with the altitude. And then within Galilee, we have the Upper Galilee region and then the Golan Heights wine region. And both of these are north of the Sea of Galilee, and they're on the border with Lebanon and Syria, respectively. And then we have the Lower Galilee region, which is a sub-region also of Galilee. That's not confusing, but it is south of the Sea of Galilee of the wine-growing regions. But this Golan Heights area, Steph, tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's special because of the volcanic soils. It's on a plateau, and it's got, some higher elevation. it also actually sees some snowfall during wintertime. So that's kind of a big deal there, because most of people are probably thinking desert or Mediterranean, but this specific area, which has gained popularity more recently because it's a good wine growing area. And back to this particular, did we say what was in the blend?
I said what was in the blend, but
Okay.
I have not stopped sipping it.
Yes. Well, you know what? I think this is it's like a soft sunshine fruits. I thought it tasted like fluffy blueberry pancakes with blueberry syrup.
What? Listen to you with the wine notes. Oh my gosh. I was thinking ripe summer berries, and then it occurred to me that it reminds me of a New World wine because it is fruit forward. It's got moderate plus aromatics in here because you've got all these different, you got the Cabernet Franc, the Sauvignon, the Malbec, as we mentioned, but it is mouth-filling and lush. The tannins, they are really, really soft, velvety tannins considering what is in this wine. It's a plush.
Yes, it definitely is. And Justin, his description was he thought it tasted like a California blend with a lot of orange peel is what he was getting. So I thought that was
Justin.
I know. He was having so much fun tasting these Israeli wines, which I adore. So I thought that was a good description.
What occurred to me also while I was thinking New World wine, Israel isn't so much considered New World, is it?
No.
Usually it's the stuff in the Southern Hemisphere, it's in the Americas, and we'll talk about the history of wine grape growing and winemaking in this region later, but it does have a New World style to it, and if you think about it, their kind of emergence onto the international stage happened only in the 80s, only the year I graduated high school, which was 1984. That was when their first wine was kind of released to market. So it is kind of a New World concept because of all these Californians that kind of rolled up in there in the 70s and 80s and started sharing their knowledge of wine grape growing. So I think that's an interesting aspect that this particular wine shows that, would you say?
Yes, and I also think that, probably for those of us out west, in the U.S. or even in the central U.S. don't nearly have the exposure to Israeli wines as our wine-loving friends in New York or on the East Coast. So I think, we're a little bit sheltered from some of those cool wines, even though, as we're going to get to, we are a major export market for Israel. So I think we'll start to see it more. I think it's just a matter of time. But how about the next wine number 3? A few dollars more. This is about a $17 bottle.
This next wine is a Syrah, and it is from the 2014 vintage, which was an outstanding vintage for Israel as well, or for this region. This is the Gilgal Syrah 2014, and it is the U.S. only brand for the Golan Heights Winery. Now, here's the thing about this. I just waxed poetic about the New World style of the last wine, the red blend.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought about when I sipped this one, and it is it's somewhere between a Syrah from like Washington State. It's got a little bit of that fruit, but on the palate, you get that black olive and that you normally get from a Rhone, from like a Cornat, like 100% Cornat or some Syrah from Cornat. So this is an interesting little wine because it does have some nice tannins. I think the tannins they're pretty ripe still. Even though this is a 2014, it's a 4-year-old wine. They're still, moderate plus in texture, and they do coat the mouth, and yet it still balances nicely with the pronounced flavors of the black pepper and the black berries. More ripe berries in this, but I really like this. It is somewhere beside more New World Washington with kind of a little nod to the Rhone going, hey, black olive in the house, maybe a little bacon. I'm really liking this. I'm kind of curious what their tasting notes say. Let me see.
Yeah, what does it say? That's a very positive review. Nice job, Val.
Yeah, I don't wax poetic about wines that get sent to us that I don't love. But I might just say, I might just give you the technical, less emotional, more objective tasting note.
Yeah, I like that. It says earth, smoke, spice, and meat.
Yay, meat. I got it. Yay. Give me points. Although I would have not on a blind tasting put this in Israel, I probably would have tried to place it actually with the meat somewhere in maybe like South Africa.
Oh, okay.
I would have said, okay, it's Washington. Yeah, I got the fruit, but I would have gone New World. I would have probably gone South Africa, maybe. I don't know, even with those tannins. But they say you can drink this, 5 to 7 years from vintage, and they recommend it with lamb. And I love a Rhone with lamb. I love this with lamb. I would totally have this, or homemade thin crust pizza.
Yeah, baby. Just wait till we get to the fourth wine. But before we do,
you, Victor.
Yeah. Before we do, we've got more talk of the rest of the country. So we already mentioned the northernmost wine region, but let's briefly go over the other major wine growing regions south of Galilee.
Yeah, we're going to move south and west. So we started way up in the top of the country there, way up near the border, as we mentioned. But as we move south and west toward the Mediterranean Sea, we have Samaria, or Shamron in Hebrew. And this is where we find the mount. I'm waving back and forth in my chair because I am so excited about these wines. I can't stand it. We're in the Mount Carmel, Sharon, and Shamron Hills subregions, which are located in the Samaria or the Shamron region. And considering this is the largest growing region, the climate here is certainly different. Remember, we're talking near the sea, where the other place, where the Golan Heights, they get snow. But if we're closer to the sea, you still got a little bit of altitude, but you've got that moderating influence in the humidity from the sea.
Yeah.
That is the next region. And we don't have any wines from that region, of course, because we're focusing on the Golan Heights Winery today. But south of that, and moving further south of Tel Aviv, I think most people know where Tel Aviv is, but you're going to move south into into a region called Samson or Shimshon. Now, this is the second largest region, and this is where the Judean foothills are and the Judean lowlands. But again, we're talking Mediterranean climate and a central coast plain. But if we move directly east of Samson and just west of Jerusalem, so we're sandwiched in between the Samson region, but sandwiched in between that and Jerusalem, we find, not to be confused with the Samson subregion we just mentioned, the Judean hills. So not the Judean foothills or Judean lowlands. This is called the Judean hills. This is the main region, or Hari Yehuda. And I hope I'm saying that correctly, but the other parts of this region kind of run further south into Yatir Forest. And these are the most central regions. And these are all between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. And there's a whole lot of seas going on here, right, Steph?
Yeah. I want to have you been to the Dead Sea before on your travels?
I have. I've got a picture of me actually floating in the Dead Sea in a yoga pose.
Oh, man, that is so cool. Will you put that in the blog?
Yeah, I'm in bow pose, which if you don't know, you're kind of reaching back and grabbing your ankles.
Yeah.
And you're arching your back. And I had one of the guys I was with, I think I still have this picture. It was done on film, I believe. No, I do have it. And I'm floating in the Dead Sea in this yoga pose. And I have to say, I was there for work. So I wasn't there being a tourist, but we landed on Friday or Thursday. We spent Friday doing a little touring because our meeting started on Sunday. The workday starts on Sunday in Israel. But I've been to the Dead Sea, and it's really dry out there.
Yeah.
But then you get to the Mediterranean, again, it's warm. We were there in October, and it was actually warm. But that is a good climate indicator if you get back to the vine growing, because you think about, you've got these two big bodies of water, and then you've got these warm days, but you've got these cool nights. There are some mountains and hills around there, but Jerusalem is a growing area, and many people don't realize it, as are the Judean hills and the Gush Etzion. So that's, I think, an interesting region, a little bit more central. Yeah. But we're going to move all the way south because that's the desert stuff.
Yeah, so Negev, I think is how they say it. And it takes us to the desert, right? So now you're at a totally different climate, which is kind of cool because even for a small area, you can see that there's different climates, different elevations, so it makes for different styles of wines. And this subregion of Negev it's a major region, and the subregions are Ramat Arad and southern Negev. And again, you get the diurnal swings, just like you would think of in a desert. Like, remember when we talked about Arizona wines, right?
Yeah.
Right. So hot days, cool nights. We're not tasting any of those wines today, but I'm definitely going to be looking for them now that I'm more familiar myself after doing all this research, which is really cool with the podcast and having some Israeli wines that you've never had before.
I agree. And I think we want to move on to the next wine because you're all like, just get to the Cabernet already. Actually, you're not, because you don't know we have a Cabernet next. We might not. But we do want to mention a little cultural note because we approached this with the knowledge that, and I had some diploma notes and we kind of stalked a few websites. But I did find an article that interviewed this winemaker, Victor Schoenfeld. And this was on a website called forward.com, and it was kind of a cultural article. So before we move on to wine number 4, may or may not be Cabernet, we should note that the summary of the Israel wine regions that we just gave you, a lot of people in the wine community consider this kind of an old wine map, and it may not be the best depiction of grapes and winemaking culture, so please don't click us off, because we want to give you that perspective. Because what Victor was saying was that the wines, and he's the guy who made the wines we tasted today, he said that winemakers are starting to take steps to develop a more modern wine map to use because there are grapes coming from places in Israel we did not mention. And he quotes, as a tool for explaining about the different wine region in Israel. And that is from Sadie Flateman. And that was just a May 2018 article. So we used a 2016 map. We use some 2016 articles and data, and we use a 2015 Oxford Companion to Wine as well as some other articles online. So we definitely want to make sure we're giving you the best information. So don't click us off, but click on this article that we're going to link up in the show notes called Why Israel Needs a New Map for Wine. Because our desire for this podcast in particular is to provide an overview and familiarization and just put this on your Wine to 5 challenge or Wino radar.
Right.
So,
yes.
Right?
Good point.
Moving on.
As of this recording, though, we're going to start to throw in some factoids here. There are over 320 wineries in Israel. I mean, who knew that? And the top 12 wineries account for 95% of the market. And the one that we're drinking, Golan Heights Winery, is one of the biggies. So you might see that one before you see others. But some of the other wineries, some of these other big top guns are Barkin, Carmel, and Tepperberg.
And where do they ship the most wine to, Steph? What's their biggest export? Where? I can't imagine.
I can't imagine. Well, I already said it a little bit earlier, but the U.S. of A is the number one export market. And then behind us is France and then the UK. So that's where a lot of the Israeli wine is going.
You want to do the next wine and then get into this kosher wine fact?
Okay, yeah. You want to lead us into, tell us what we're drinking and the color.
Well, yes. Oh my goodness. The Yarden Cabernet Sauvignon 2014. This is their flagship wine. This is a $35 bottle, people. And Yarden, I have a story about Yarden because this is probably one of the very first Israeli wines I ever had 10 years ago.
Wow.
Last month. And it is another brand in the Golan Heights Winery portfolio. So I want to kind of get Steph's notes on this since I waxed poetic all over that Syrah. And she is just, her head is back in ecstasy. And I just want to sip on this while you talk about it because it
gladly.
Good.
I will gladly talk about this gorgeous wine that Justin and I almost drank the whole bottle last night. And I made him save me some for the podcast. But this is exploding with herbs and spice, and I thought there was like a lot of sawdust, leather, pristine fruit, like flawless fruit. The best fruit you've ever seen. It's just gorgeous. Justin said he loved it. He thought it had a minty kind of aftertaste. I thought there was maybe like mace or some other. It's hard to identify all the spices because there was so much going on with the complexity. When I love wines this much, I usually just swirl and smell and swirl and smell. And it's such a great wine. And for $30, I think it drinks more like a $70 bottle of wine.
Yeah, I was going to say $60 or $70, this one here. And I always try to compare it because if you haven't had wine from Israel, you're probably thinking, well, Val, tell us, what it would most be like. And again, I'm probably I'm going kind of somewhere between new and old world here. I'm not going new world with this.
Yeah, so you can't fit it into a box or anything.
Category.
Yeah.
This one, nobody puts this Cabernet in a corner. It's got that cocoa powder thing going on that you're like, oh, Rutherford dust. But then you're like, wait a minute. You said mace. I'm thinking of za'atar seasoning that I put on my flatbreads and my naan and things like that. So I'm kind of like, you get that herbs and spice that you associate with the Mediterranean region, but then you get that cocoa powder that you associate with the New World, but then you get the earthiness you associate with like a Bordeaux, and yet there's something screaming Italy to me. So yeah, I probably would not, because the tannins are they're pretty fine grained here.
Right.
But they're still prominent enough to stand up to all these flavors that we have. It's a nicely balanced wine, and
I can see
ridiculous.
why this is an important wine for the winery, and this is their flagship wine. I mean, they should be very proud of this wine. I bet your John is going to love this wine. He is. We have it under Coravan right now because I still have an Italian wine open, and then we've got this red blend open.
Yeah.
But I think he's going to love all of these wines.
Yeah.
I can't say there's a wine in here that we don't love. So, gosh, Victor, bravo, sir.
Yes.
Slow clap right up in here.
Slow clap. I love that.
Slow clap. But I want to talk about the little note that was on the back of these wines. This wine is not mevushal. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the wine is not mevushal. So this word mevushal is mevushal. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but it's right under the rabbi's signature. So I thought, well, certainly, if we're educating, we need to know what all of these terms are. And so I thought, okay, kosher wine versus kosher mevushal wine. And this is important because 95% of Israeli wines are kosher, according to the winesisrael.com website that we were checking out, and some other resources. And mevushal means cooked. So this is a type of kosher wine that's heated to 180 degrees Fahrenheit for less than a minute. Then it's cooled down very quickly. So you will also hear this called flash pasteurization. It is often served at events where non-Jews will be pouring wine for Orthodox Jews. We're not going to really kind of go into all of that, but that's what that term means. And if you're wondering, well, I don't know what kosher is in the first place, that is when the winemaking and handling of the wine, everything from crushing to bottling, must be done by a Shabbat observant Jew. That's kind of the difference. From what I can tell when I was researching is that even the cooked mevushal wines or the pasteurized wines have gotten so much better that they're not all terribly cooked wines. Just to put that out there. I haven't had one. Have you, Val?
If I did, it was in Israel, and I don't know. Because the hotel I was staying at had wines open like all the time. We had access to this special lounge.
Okay.
And there were wines in there all the time, but I don't remember reading the bottles. I wasn't a scholar back then. I was there for work. And so I was only like hitting the wines like after work. But what was also interesting about this, because you might see it on a shelf talker in a store, you might see kosher or you might see mevushal, and now you kind of know the difference. But every wine producing country can make kosher wine.
Yeah, I mean, they have kosher wine in California and France, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like you said, there are small wineries in Israel that do not make kosher wine, or that make non-kosher wine, I should say. So, Steph, you've got a really cool link here called myjewishlearning.com.
Yeah.
And it was an article on the mevushal wine. And we hope we're saying that correctly as well, because it was not informal.
No, it wasn't. I looked it up. I was like, I hope I'm saying this right. But yeah, I think there is some great information out there, and we're trying to link it up and make sure it's more convenient for our listeners, so you can find these show notes and go directly to what we're talking about.
Damn, this Cabernet's good.
Oh, God, that Cabernet, right? Oh, my gosh.
Right?
And I guess, right, Cabernet is king. So let's talk about the major grapes. Yeah, we're going to talk about the major grapes because, well, Cabernet is one of the big ones. Like Steph said, king. Why has it got to be king? Why can't it be a queen? Just saying. Followed by Carignan, Merlot, and Syrah. And then, of course, the leading white grapes are the Colombard, Muscat of Alexandria, and Chardonnay. But yet we're drinking, Sauvignon and Viognier.
Yeah, some cool ones.
And, in our glass.
Yeah.
So that's crazy.
That is
and
crazy.
What about the geeky local varieties?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's that cool cross that's called Argamon.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, how do you say the cross between Suzhou and Carignan?
Sure.
And then the other cool grapes that if you listen to our episode with Kevin Bigos, he mentioned a few of these, but Marawi or Hamdani, Jandali, Dabuki, and Baladi. I mean, that sounds like some geeky grape gabs.
It really is. And something I was looking for when I was kind of digging on the history a bit is I found a few articles on the Israel Winemakers Association website, the Israel Wine Producers Association website about the history of the wine. And there were a couple articles insinuating that there were no autochthonous varieties to Israel, that they were originally not vinifera grapes, but then they were developed to make wine, but they were original table grapes. So I don't know how that squares up with the Kevin Bigos book, but yeah. I found it very interesting because of there's no way to guarantee, to verify this through history, but there are more people looking to discover these geeky grape varieties. We say geeky because that's a good thing. Yeah. These are the grapes that are unique to that area, if not autochthonous. So we find that kind of thing very, very interesting. But they also have a range of style stuff. So we're drinking still or table or, table wine not being a quality level, but a style of wine, meaning it's not fortified and it's not sparkling. Right. You want to talk about the other styles that they do make?
Well, they do make all sorts of styles. And, I didn't really find that they, again, are not put into a corner or fit into a box. I mean, they do make all sorts of wine. And I think what's nice to know is that they have entry-level, affordable, everyday wines. They have expensive, world-class, award-winning wines that are getting points from all the people who give points. We don't need to name them all.
The points are the people who give points. We don't do points on the show. We don't do
points.
We don't do points.
We're kind of anti-points on this. I was going to say on this station. But anyway, yeah. So I wasn't going to go into all of that. But, there is bulk wine produced there. But there's a lot of different styles. I just didn't find that they had any kind of specific sweet style or sparkling style or anything like that they were known for. But we do know that they make a variety of different wines at different quality levels and at different price points. But I am most impressed with the higher end wines. And I think if I were to taste maybe something like $100 bottle, I'm sure I would think it was pretty impressive because the $35 bottle is really extraordinary.
It really is. I'm going to pour this blind for John. He doesn't listen anyway. So,
all right, deliver us some history, Val. You are so good at this part.
Oh, thank you so much. So here's what I've gathered, just a few little factoids and tidbits about the history of winemaking and grape growing, because they have a long history in the Middle East and the Levant, or the Eastern Mediterranean. And their history actually precedes European winemaking by thousands of years. And most of you have heard that before. The words, the cradle of wine culture, the cradle of wine industry, these have been used in reference to the region where grape seeds are little pips that they found, they carbon dated them back to like the Stone Age, like 8,000 BCE. So that's crazy. So this whole area is where they have done archaeological digs and they found wine presses and amphorae, and they've referenced winemaking from Mount Herman and all the way down to Negev in the south, as well as vineyard mentions of Galilee and Judea. But wine was historically not only used for religious rituals, which I think many of you might be thinking. They would use it to dye their clothes or for textile dye. Yeah. As I just spilled wine on myself before making this podcast.
Yeah.
Hello. Yes, I'm sitting here together in wine-stained leggings. And they even used it for medicine. We've talked about the medicinal purposes of wine in the past before. And they would even use it for cleaning, like for cleaning around the house. So, yes, dear, I'm just scrubbing out the sink with the same musket I'm sipping.
That's right. I mean, some for me, a little for me, a little bit for the countertop.
There you go. A little disinfectant. But around 600 or so BCE, winemaking and grape growing was also vital to ancient Israel's economy, as well as being an import and export. So, once the Arabs came in and conquered the region, alcohol was actually prohibited and many of the vines were destroyed or they were dug up. But then along came the Crusaders in the 12th century. So we're kind of moving a little bit ahead because they tried to revive the wine industry. But then the Jews were exiled and the vines were once again abandoned. However, during the late 18th century, when the Jews returned from diaspora, they began building the wine industry anew. And it was Baron Edmond de Rothschild, along with some of his French buddies, who came along, and these experts who could be credited with the ushering in of the modern era of winemaking. And this is all in the Oxford Companion to Wine from the 2015 version by Jancis Robinson. And this is where I learned that during this period, the large wineries were actually built, and they built these underground cellars. And at the time of that writing, these two wineries were still amongst the largest in Israel. One of them I couldn't find. I think one of them might have changed their names, so I'm not going to mention them. But it would be about 100 years later. So we're talking about the 1890s.
Right, yeah.
When they started rebuilding the industry, right? But it wasn't until nearly 100 years later, the 80s, which Steph mentioned earlier, where the California winemakers would descend upon the region and help bring about Israel's wine quality revolution. Every region has had a wine quality revolution. We've talked about it in Italy. We talked about it in America. This was shortly after ours. And this was complete with international varieties being planted. They were taking advantage of terroir features like what they've learned about exposure and slope and altitude and vine training and yield. And this, my friends, brings us full circle to the Golan Heights Winery, particularly the Yarden wines, which we're sipping right now and can't get enough of, because that would wake the world up to Israeli wines. In particular, it was the 1983 Yarden Sauvignon Blanc, released in 1984, that brought this wine to the world stage and said, hey, we're here. We're not going anywhere.
I know, it's impressive. And I mean, yeah, you can see the similar pattern that different wine growing regions around the world have had, you know, with these crusaders or, you know, and then a revolution and this and that, or phylloxera and things, you know. But it's funny that last night Justin said, what's with all the French grapes in these Israeli wines, you know? And I was like, well, in the late 1800s, you know, and I was like, well, the French did make a difference, but, you know, I mean, once they figured out that this is what grows there because of the conditions and the terroir and stuff too, I mean, it's just a matter of, you know, doing what's best for the land and the climate and everything. So
well, it's also the market,
yeah,
because people recognize Cabernet Sauvignon. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to sit here in a wine shop and you're going to go, oh, look, here's a Sauvignon Blanc. Oh, here's an Argamon, or here's a Cabernet Sauvignon, or here's an
right.
Argamon. You're going to go, what?
Well, even the American market, right, would look at like, oh, Carignan and then Cabernet, and they're like, oh, I'll get the Cabernet, because
right.
they're not familiar, even though that's really what used to be like most widely planted. But, you know, now Cabernet is, and I think they're doing a great job with that.
Right. But as the climate does change, we're going to see how this affects the growing of different grape varieties and regions and how winemakers have to plan for that. So
right.
it's the market. The U.S. was a big part of that market, and it is the climate is what grows there, as Steph said. Mm-hmm. But the Yarden, like I said, Steph, has a special place in my heart because, you know, this is one of the first wines that I ever had.
Yep.
And, you know, I was in Israel for work 10 years ago, October, and the hotel staff would put these little half bottles of Yarden, and I believe it was Cabernet.
How cool.
these little bottles. There'd be one in my room every day of the Yarden Cabernet. And then every day, either I drank it or I slid it into my luggage. So I actually brought some back with me. And I came back. It was Halloween 2008 I landed. And I had a little bottle of Yarden in my luggage. And I wish I still had a picture of the label because I kept the little half bottle because I'd never seen Israeli wines on the market back then. That was 2008.
That is so cool because, yesterday was Halloween. And that's 10 years ago. And I think that's really neat. I mean, probably to drink that wine is kind of like a little time capsule,
It is, and I don't really remember. I remember going out to a restaurant with the guys. We had a Gold Key concierge at the hotel who found us a restaurant Friday night because it was Shabbat. So most restaurants are closed in Tel Aviv, and they found us a little Italian place. There was a steakhouse and an Italian place, and that was it. And we ordered a bottle of wine, and it wasn't Israeli, but because we're eating Italian, we thought we'd have Italian wine, and it wasn't good. And then, the wine they had at the hotel was good. And I remember my last day in Tel Aviv, we were getting a night flight out. And so we had a little free time. So I walked down the beach toward Jaffa, and that was where I bought my Halloween costume, which was supposed to be a belly dancer, by the way, in Jaffa. And I remember halfway back, I sat at this little cafe. It was a beautiful day. I was sitting by the sea having this roasted vegetable eggplant sandwich. And I asked for this Golan Heights Syrah. Wow. I don't remember who the producer was, but it was a Golan Heights Syrah. And all I can remember was eating this sandwich. I actually wrote in my journal about it, having this sandwich, writing about this Syrah in this moment, looking out over the Mediterranean. And I asked the server, I said, how do you say perfect in Hebrew? And he said, meshlem. Now, I don't know if that's correct, but I wrote what I thought it sounded like in my journal. And it was just absolutely perfect. And I have to say, I'm really, really impressed with these wines, and it's taking me to a really special place right now. Yeah. So I'm glad we got to cover them.
I think that's really cool. And we've got lots of resources for everybody. So please check out our really long list of other things to check out and other ways to explore and learn. We may have piqued something of your interest. And onto our wino radar, I think is more like wino movies, because there are two movies to make sure that you know about. One of them is called 3 Days of Glory. That's a documentary about Burgundy's devastating spring frost in 2016, if some of you remember that. And then the 3 days every November of a ruckus celebration. So that's also part of the movie. And there have been some pre-screenings, but the official release is November 16th of 2018. So shortly after this episode airs, and Val and I also will be checking out the movie. So more on that to come.
We're going to give Patricia a shout out. She's the director of strategic communications for Gregory and Vine. And thank you for sending us these samples. I think she sent them back in September, and we're finally getting to air this episode. So we really appreciate you sending us these gorgeous, gorgeous wines.
Yes. And to Golan Heights Winery, of course, and the winemaker, this is a beautiful selection of your offerings. So thank you so much.
Bravo, Victor. And then, of course, Steph, we got to give a shout out to Kern and Stubb for one bourbon, one shard, one beer. Got to listen to their latest episode, which aired 26 October, because their guests are absolutely crazy. They're crazy.
I don't know where they found these ladies from Wine 25. I don't know why Kern and Stubb had those ladies on their show.
I don't know, but we're going to have to get them on this show because that was a blast. I actually have not listened to this episode yet, but I was there. So you guys will link it up, but go to One Bourbon, One Shard and check out this podcast, because it's like what would you say? It's wine plus music plus game show.
Wine, music, game show, competitive, hilarious. You learn something. Mostly you just have fun and shake your head the whole time.
You do. And we did record 2 episodes with them. So this is the first one. And then there's another one. And one of them I swear at the host, but I asked permission first. So it's all good.
That's right. That's right.
So next shout out, Steph.
Shout out to WTSO, our show sponsor. WTSO has top quality wines like this week's Sexy Baccarat at flash sale prices. And when you join their email list, there's no commitment and you get to shop at your own pace. So the good deals come to you, and then you decide.
Go to your listener page at weeklytasting.com/W25 to sign up and get started, or just go to our webpage, click on the grapes, and it'll take you right there.
And now on to Patreon love.
First with our Reserva Superiore supporter, Robin from Girls Gone Grape. Thank you, Robin. Our Reserva Superiore, I don't know. I know he's in the wine industry, Auntie in Georgia, but the stuff he's posting on Twitter, the different whiskeys and stuff, it's ridiculous. Please follow him on Twitter. He's just incredible. Tenacious Tasters, Jeff E. from the award-winning We Like Drinking podcast, Sebastian of Sassy Italy Tours, Jen in Maryland, Dave and Lisa in Illinois, Anne-Marie in Virginia, Lynn of Savor the Harvest blog, and Sharon in Florida.
And it's not 5 o'clock, and we don't care. Listener supporters, Megan, South Dakota, Clay in Arizona, John, Andrew, Iswani, and Kristen in California, Chantel in Ontario, Mary Lou in Pennsylvania, Kathy in Georgia, Chris, Janet, and Diane in Colorado, Steve and Renee in Illinois, Kathy in Tennessee, Sean in Ohio, Ashley and Sarah in North Carolina.
And our Tastemaker listeners, David in Scotland, Carol in Kentucky, Karen in California, Chip and Katie in Pennsylvania, Serena in New York, Annie in Colorado, and Danielle.
And go to wine25.com and click on support to show your support and find more details. And in between these episodes, you can find goodies on our website, wine25.com, or find us on the social spaces at wine25. So until next week, Val, L'chaim,
which means to life.
Cheers.
Cheers, Steph.
Thank you for listening to the Wine to 5 podcast. Be sure to check us out at Facebook/WineTWO5 and tune in next week for more fun and useful sip tips.
Gosh, my last sip of Cabernet. So good.
So good.